Your husband is dead. 50,000 Romans just watched him die, torn apart by a lion. You are locked in a stone cell, deep beneath the greatest arena the world has ever known. The crowd's thunder still echoes above, a dull hum of departure. Sandals scrape stone, a symphony of indifference. Torches dim one by one, their flickering lights swallowed by the encroaching darkness. The noise dies. Then you hear it. Footsteps. Slow, heavy, deliberate. They are getting closer. A shadow stretches across your doorway, long and distorted. A man steps into the light. It is the gladiator who survived today's massacre. His armor is dented, his body strewn with blood that is not his own. A guard follows behind him, keys clinking softly, almost musically in the oppressive silence. The lock turns, the door opens. The gladiator points at you. This is not a horror movie. This was Tuesday in the Roman Empire. This is the part of Roman history they do not teach in school. The truth that emerged after the cheers stopped and the crowds went home. This was a systematic state-sponsored nightmare that only began when the arena went quiet. This is not speculation. Roman writers describe it themselves in chilling detail. The evidence, stark and undeniable, is carved into the very walls beneath the Colosseum. Stay with me until the end, and you will never look at ancient Rome the same way again. Hollywood has lied to you about gladiators for decades. Films like Gladiator and Spartacus show blood, honor, rebellion, defiance. They depict men dying under the sun, swords raised, crowds roaring in approval. What they do not show is what happened in the hours after the games ended, when the spectacle turned inward, when entertainment became something far darker. I am talking about a system so disturbing that modern historians had to invent a new Latin term to describe it. Victoria carnales, the carnal victory. The Romans never called it that to them. It was not shocking. It did not need a name. It was just how things worked. Here is what we know for certain. Roman writers like Martial, Juvenal, and Seneca describe a world where conquered women were stored beneath arenas and distributed as prizes. Not symbolically. Mind you, they were literally handed out like rations to gladiators who fought well. This was not the work of rogue individuals or corrupt guards. The Roman state itself ran the system. The same government that engineered aqueducts and roads also engineered the logistics of sexual violence. Think about that for a moment. The civilization that gave us concrete law and representative government also perfected the industrialization of human suffering. They understand what happened in those underground chambers. You first have to understand how Rome turned human beings into inventory. This was not random cruelty. It was systematic dehumanization carried out on an industrial scale. It began the moment Roman legions conquered new territory. When Rome crushed a rebellion in Gaul or annihilated a city in Judea, they did not just win a battle. They processed an entire population. Men of fighting age were sent to die in mines or arenas. Children were sold into slave markets across the empire. Women were labeled captiva, war prizes that belonged to the state. And here is where it becomes truly chilling. Under Roman law, these people were no longer legally human. They were classified as rethings property. They occupied the same legal category as furniture or livestock. A conquered woman had no more rights than a chair. You could do anything to her, and it was not legally a crime, because you cannot commit a crime against an object. But Rome did not rely on law alone to enforce this grim reality. It relied on spectacle. The games were not just entertainment. They were political theater designed to dominate the conquered and to condition Rome's own citizens. When you watched a captured Germanic chieftain torn apart by a lion, you were not just seeing a man die. You were watching Rome demonstrate precisely what happens to those who dare to resist. During the midday lull, when the elites left for lunch, that is when things became truly sadistic. Historians call these events fatal charades, mythological reenactments where condemned prisoners were forced to act out famous legends. Except the deaths were terrifyingly real. Martial, writing in the 1st century A.D., describes these scenes with disturbing casualness, almost like a food critic reviewing a meal. In one account, a prisoner was dressed as Orpheus, the legendary musician who could charm any creature with a song. He was led into the arena, holding a lyre. Then they released a bear. Martial notes, almost with detached disappointment, that this time the music did not work. The bear mauled a man to death, while 50,000 spectators snacked on honey dates. In another passage, and I must warn you this is deeply disturbing, Marshall describes a woman forced to reenact the myth of Pasiphae, who in legend coupled with a sacred bull for this prisoner. The reenactment meant being subjected to public extreme degradation and violence by an animal in front of thousands of people until she died from her injuries. The Roman state created a system where human beings were utterly dehumanized, dying by animal attack as lunchtime entertainment. This was not the fantasy of a single mad emperor. It went on for decades. Senators brought their children. Vendors sold snacks. Events were advertised on city walls. And Marshall praises it. He writes, "Whatever myth tells, the arena makes real." He meant it as a compliment. This was the environment, the bureaucratic industrial machinery of cruelty that also turned conquered women into rewards for gladiators. Now, we need to talk about the men who received those rewards. Gladiators existed in a profound contradiction Rome never resolved. They were slaves, often with less legal status than a dog. Yet they were celebrities. Their faces appeared on mosaics. Their names were scratched into walls by adoring fans. Women of the aristocracy were obsessed with them. Graffiti in Pompeii calls one gladiator the sigh of the girls, and another the glory of the ladies. Noble women snuck into gladiator barracks, bribing guards for private encounters. One gladiator, Sergius, reportedly had affairs with multiple married patrician women, causing public scandal. Even their sweat was commodified. After fights, gladiators were scraped down, their sweat mixed with olive oil and sold as an aphrodisiac and beauty treatment. Think about that. Enslaved men owned by the state, whose bodily fluids were bottled and sold to the elite. And yet Rome was terrified of them. The Spartacus rebellion of 73 BC haunted the Roman psyche. 78 gladiators escaped, raised an army of 70,000, and nearly destroyed the Republic. For 2 agonizing years, they crushed legion after legion. When Rome finally won, they crucified 6,000 survivors along the Ion Way. One body every 40 m. A forest of crosses stretching for 200 kilometers. That trauma never faded. Every gladiator holding a sword was a stark reminder that these men had once come terrifyingly close to burning Rome to the ground. So the question was simple. How do you control incredibly dangerous, highly trained men with every reason to rebel? You reward them carefully, strategically, extra food, prize money, the promise of freedom after enough victories, and something else. Something the sources mention only in passing, as if it were too obvious to explain. Access to conquered women. The documentation is scattered, frustratingly vague. Roman writers do not dwell on it. But when you piece together references from Martial, Juvenal, and later historians, a chilling pattern emerges. After major games, especially those funded by emperors or powerful senators, victorious gladiators were granted what sources call the privileges of the victor. Modern historians believe this often meant access to female captives held beneath the arena. And that is where we are going next. Because the real horror did not happen on the sand. It happened underground. The process was cold, efficient, almost administrative. After a particularly brutal match, a gladiator who survived and impressed the crowd would not return directly to his barracks. Instead, still wearing his armor, still caked in blood and sand, he would be escorted downward into the Hippone, the vast underground network beneath the arena floor. Oil lamps flickered along the tunnel walls. The air smelled of iron, sweat, and animal waste. They passed cages where lions paced in the dark. Mechanical lifts creaked softly, ready to raise the next spectacle to the surface. This part of the arena was invisible to the crowd above. That was the point. An arena official or Lanista representative walked ahead, a wax tablet in hand. Not metaphorically. It was a literal ledger, names, numbers, property inventories. They stopped at a section of holding cells most spectators never knew existed. These were not ordinary prison cells. Archaeological excavations beneath amphitheaters across the empire, Capua, Pompeii, Puteoli, even beneath the Colosseum itself, have revealed small stone chambers with distinctive unsettling features. Stone benches built at a precise height, iron rings anchored into the walls, some near the floor, others at waist level, some higher. Doors reinforced with iron that locked from the outside. In several chambers, chains are permanently mounted into the stone, part of the architecture itself. These rooms were not improvised, they were designed. The women held inside were called captivity, condemned war captives. They had already been processed through Rome's bureaucracy of conquest. Officials known as commentari recorded them in ledgers as state property. Each woman was assigned a number, a category, an origin: Germanica, Britannica, Partha. Human beings reduced to mere labels. The gladiator will be shown a row of cells. Some accounts suggest he could choose. Others imply the assignment was made for him, like equipment being issued from a storehouse. Either way, a guard unlocked the designated door. Sometimes a woman was brought out. Sometimes the gladiator was pushed inside. Then the door was locked again. What happened next is never described in explicit detail by Roman writers. They did not need to. The architecture tells a story. This was not considered a crime. It was not even controversial. It was a line item in the operational budget of the games. The logistics of Victoria Carnales were handled by the same administrators who scheduled animal fights and repaired arena machinery. From the state's perspective, the system was elegant. It rewarded loyal gladiators without granting them real freedom. It cost almost nothing. Conquered women were already classified as spoils of war, and it reinforced the core message of Roman power. Victory means access. Dominance means ownership. One Roman writer quoted by later historians summarized a delay. The victor claims his prize, as the empire claims its provinces by right of conquest. Now, we need to talk about the spaces where this happened because the archaeology is impossible to ignore. When excavations beneath the Colosseum began in the 19th century, researchers focused on engineering marvels: the elevators, trapdoor, and tunnels that made the games possible. But as work continued, something else emerged: rooms that did not fit. These chambers were small, typically 10 to 15 square meters. They were isolated from animal cages and gladiator preparation rooms. They served no obvious logistical purpose except one: the benches were not for resting. They were too narrow, too deliberately placed. The iron rings were positioned at multiple heights, as if designed for different restraints. And the walls. In several chambers, archaeologists found scratch marks etched deep into the stone. Desperate fingernails, repeated attempts to claw through solid rock. He is discussing game logistics, human resources. But the most haunting evidence comes from graffiti. In the hippocamp beneath the amphitheater at Capua, the same city where Spartacus began his rebellion, archaeologists found inscriptions scratched into cell walls. Some are in Latin, others in Celtic languages. Many are fragmentary. A few are legible. One reads roughly, "I was Aemilia of the Gantes. I saw my children killed, now I am nothing." Another written in broken script to any god who hears "let me die before tomorrow." These voices do not appear in Roman histories. Emperors and generals get names. Victories get monuments. But the stones remember what the chronicles ignore. And the architecture tells us something crucial. This system was built for repetition. These were not secret rooms created by corrupt guards. They were standardized facilities designed, maintained, and replicated across the empire, just like gladiator barracks, just like animal pens, just like weapons storage. The captive chambers fit the same pattern. This was state-sponsored infrastructure for systematic abuse. Some historians argue we should not read too much into this, that these rooms could have served multiple purposes, that we are projecting modern horror onto ancient evidence. But when you combine the architecture with literary references, Roman military culture, and basic logic about how the games functioned, the picture becomes unavoidable. Now we have to confront the hardest part of this story: what this meant for the women trapped inside that system. History is almost silent about their individual experiences. We do not have diaries. We do not have testimony. What we have are ledgers listing them as inventory. Female Germanic, approximately 20 years good health, assigned to Colosseum holding. But we can reconstruct the nightmare. These women were not random prisoners. They came from moments of absolute devastation. When Rome crushed resistance during the Dian Wars or the suppression of the Britannic Revolt, led by Boudicca, the aftermath followed procedure. Men were killed or enslaved for labor. Children were separated and sold to distant markets. Women of childbearing age were chained together and transported as captiva. For a woman in that position, the journey to the arena was already a descent through hell. You watched your village burn. You saw your children torn from your arms. You were marched hundreds of miles in chains. You were stripped, examined, numbered. Then you were locked beneath the greatest monument of the civilization that destroyed everything you knew. The waiting was torture. You could hear everything. The roar of the crowd above as people like you were executed for sport. The screams of animals. The cheers when a gladiator landed a perfect killing blow. And you knew you would never leave. There was no ransom, no exchange. Rome did not negotiate with the conquered. Your family would never know what happened to you. You simply vanished into the machinery of empire. Then came the footsteps, the door opening, the selection, the lock turning again. Roman law offered no protection. You were not legally a person. Suicide, sometimes seen as an honorable escape in Roman culture, was forbidden. Destroying state property was a crime. Even in death, your body would still be used. This was psychological warfare on a civilizational scale. The humiliation of conquered women was not a side effect of Roman policy. It was the point. Ancient sources make this explicit. After crushing the Jewish revolt in 70 AD, the historian Josephus records that Roman authorities deliberately distributed Jewish women among the legions and the games, not randomly but deliberately. The message to survivors was clear. You have lost your land. You have lost your sovereignty. And you have lost the ability to protect your families. Resist Rome. And this is what happens to your daughters. But occasionally the system cracked. For all its cruelty, Rome was obsessed with its self-image. It believed it brought order and civilization to the world. Some horrors had to remain hidden to maintain that illusion. Which brings us to an uncomfortable disruption. Female gladiators. They were rare, but they existed. Ancient sources disagree about who they were. Some were enslaved women forced to fight. Others appear to have been nobles who, in a society that gave women almost no power, sought a twisted form of agency and fame in the arena. Their existence scandalized Rome's elite. The saddest juveniles sneered. What sense of shame can exist in a woman who wears a helmet? In 200 AD, Emperor Septimius Cease attended games in Antioch that featured female fighters. Cassiodra was there. Something unexpected happened. The Greek audience reacted with samity, treating the women like male prorators. But the Roman spectators jeered. They shouted sexual comments. They turned the event into a vulgar joke. The women were not seen as warriors. They were seen as sexual spectacle. Cease was reportedly mortified, not by the violence, but by how openly Rome's cruelty revealed itself. The illusion cracked, so he banned women from fighting in the arena, not to protect them, but to push the violence back into the shadows. Because the abuse never stopped. It just returned to the darkness beneath the arena where it had always truly lived. The ban did not mark a moral turning point. Nothing was fixed. Nothing was reformed. The machinery simply kept running out of sight. The games continued for generations even after Rome officially converted to Christianity in the 4th century AD. Gladiatorial combat did not immediately end. Emperors issued half-hearted restrictions. Bishops complained. Crowds kept coming. The last recorded gladiatorial fight took place in 404 AD. A monk named Telemachus jumped into the arena trying to stop a duel. The crowd did not cheer his courage. They tore him apart. Only after his death did Emperor Honorius finally ban gladiatorial combat outright. But even that did not dismantle the system beneath the arenas. The hippoium remained. The holding chambers remained. The practice of taking war captives remained. Throughout the Byzantine period, conquered populations were still processed, categorized, and distributed. The infrastructure outlived the games themselves. The system did not end because Rome grew more ethical. It ended because Rome collapsed. When the empire fractured, the machinery of conquest broke down. Borders fell apart. Legions stopped marching. And without constant expansion, the supply of captives dried up. The institution died not from moral awakening, but from logistical failure. Today, millions of tourists walk to the Colosseum every year. They take photos beneath towering arches. They admire the engineering. Guides talk about gladiators, lions, emperors, spectacle. Very few mention what happened underneath. The rings bolted into the walls are still there. The benches are still there. The scratch marks are still there, preserved beneath centuries of dust. The ledgers that recorded human beings as inventory still exist too, stored in museums and archives across Europe. Anyone can read them. This was not rumor. It was not isolated abuse. It was policy. It was infrastructure. It was normal. The Colosseum stands today as a monument to what empire actually means. Not just architecture and victory parades, but the industrialized horror required to maintain absolute dominance. Every stone in that arena was paid for with more than money. It was paid for with lives deliberately destroyed, quietly, efficiently, and repeatedly. The spectacle on the sand was only the part Rome wanted remembered. The rest happened in the darkness beneath your feet, in the silence after the crowd went home. Those voices, the ones Roman chroniclers did not bother to record, are still there, carved into stone, if you are willing to listen. And that is the history they do not teach in school. This story reveals that true understanding of history means confronting its full, often uncomfortable truth, not just the sanitized versions.